Now, first off this afternoon, we're returning to a story I just think it's an extraordinary one. You may remember around, November-ish last year, we spoke to a man from Leicester whose grandfather was on a steamship that set sail for Africa, but was shortly thereafter sunk by the Japanese Imperial Navy just over 80 years ago. Cash Kumar was his name. Now, Cash's grandfather was never found, leaving Cash's dad, who was only 8 years old at the time, without a father. Well, since then, it's been Cash and his son Emile's mission to find out what happened on November the 20th, 1942, and to see if they can track down survivors or descendants of those survivors. Well, astonishingly, they have news. Emile Solanki joins us now from, you're in Toronto, you're in Canada.
I am, Ben. Good afternoon to you and to all of your dear listeners in Leicester. Yes, it's just gone past 9 in the morning over here. It's a drizzly day, about 4 Celsius.
Well, it's about the same here, only slightly milder. You lived in Leicester for a long time. You moved to Toronto quite a long time ago, but you have a real drive to try to not only discover those that perhaps survived or the descendants of them, but also, frankly, to tell people what happened to the Tilawa. So before we do anything else, just tell us the story.
Yeah, so this truly is the Indian Titanic. It's a British Indian story. It's a piece of Indian heritage from the Second World War that very few know about. You know, the incident took place about 3 years before the Second World War ended and 5 years before the end of British rule in India. It is believed that the SS Tilawa was the only passenger cargo liner actually attacked by enemy of the Anglo-American dual power back in the middle of the war. And it's quite sad because the SS Tilawa was a cargo liner. It was actually carrying 6,000 tons of cargo, including 60 tons of silver bullion, about 2,391 silver bars, valued at about 32 million pounds. And there were 732 passengers, 222 crew members, and 4 gunners. And they left the Ballard Pier, the Ballard Estate in South Mumbai for the final time on November 20th of 1942. They were in the middle of the Indian Ocean for a couple of days, and about 930 miles northeast of the Seychelles, the Japanese Imperial Navy twice torpedoed the SS Tilawa. We're told by some of the survivors, and when we read some of the accounts that were left for us by survivors who have now sadly passed away, that there was approximately a gap of 1 hour, and we have no idea what happened between those two torpedo attacks. But once the ship sunk, for the next 2 days, imagine people trying to keep living, floating out in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Some were in one of those 9 lifeboats, others were on life rafts. And then HMS Birmingham and SS Carthage, who were already on their way to East Africa, had to turn around, come back, pick up 678 people and bring them back to Bombay on November 27th of 1942. Interestingly, this is a bit of a twist to the story. About 5 months after the I-29 Japanese submarine Matsu destroyed this British ship, it had actually been used by Hitler and Nazi Germany to bring Subhash Chandra Bose, who was a very famous Indian political leader who had broken away from Gandhi, and he was looking for safe passage. And so he was transferred from a German U-boat in the middle of the Indian Ocean onto this Japanese submarine going to Japan. So it's just an interesting, tangent, side connection that this submarine that had, attacked his very people would now provide him safe passage to Japan. But that was something that we had learned recently too.
It is a. It is a. I mean, just hearing you retell the story sets the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. And as you say, imagine that the appalling nature of being afloat and alone and trying to keep alive for 2 days. The tragedy is you don't know what happened to your great grandfather.
Yeah, we don't. I mean, in Leicester, there are two families. We are all Solankis from the village of Kacholi, Gujarat, India. And the story goes that my great grandfather and his first cousin were in their early 20s. In fact, his first cousin's name was Devjibai Bagabai Solanki. He was born in 1918. We recently were given a copy of his passport that replaced the one that was lost on the SS Tilawa. And unfortunately, he died in the 80s, and nobody really spoke about what happened. But our understanding is that my great grandfather could not swim and he drowned. And his first cousin, Devjibai Bagabai Solanki, survived and was bitten by barracudas, just floating, trying to keep alive. But since then, we've actually come in contact with three known survivors. One is 80 years old, the second 90, and the third 98.
Well, I was going to say that when I last spoke to your dad, he came into the studio just before setting off for India, actually for a commemorative event, which by all accounts was an incredible, moving and successful thing held in India. But tell me a little bit about this 98-year-old survivor that you found. I mean, that's just breathtaking.
It's incredible. My father and I have been on this journey for 15 years now. And I had created the website Tilawa1942.com. And the purpose of the website was for it to be a comprehensive resource for anybody who wants to know more about the forgotten tragedy. That's kind of the slogan that we have given the SS Tilawa story. And it's a way to try and help families around the world bring closure. A lot of families connected to Tilawa are located in the UK and in South Africa. And so two of the families actually reached out to us through the website. So the 98-year-old gentleman, his name is Mr. Chotu Kushal. He is from the town of Bardoli, Gujarat, and he spent about half of his life in South Africa and half of his life in Canada. It's just shocking to think that he lived an hour or two from my home here in Toronto, and I never knew about him. It gets even more crazy to think that when we had organized the first ever commemoration in the world on the 80th anniversary of the forgotten tragedy, he was about a 5 to 6 hour drive north of Bombay, and we had no idea he existed. And we were able to get on a call with him last month on Zoom with his son, Mr. Pravin Patel, and actually discuss some of his recollections. The poor gentleman is now, facing some dementia. So it was difficult to get a full comprehensive story, but to still be able to hear some nuggets was quite something.
I mean, what an extraordinary thing! It strikes me that people of great age that have these extraordinary experiences, it's our duty to collect those recollections, no matter if they're fractured or not. Did you learn anything that you didn't know? Did it put some more flesh on the bones of that story?
Well, when you take his story into account, along with Miss Tej Prakash Kaur Mangat, who is the 90-year-old in Cincinnati, Ohio, and then, of course, Mr. Arvind Bhai Jani, 80 years old in South London, who also lived near the home where I grew up, went to school and played cricket. It's crazy. So basically, just to summarize each of their three stories, Arvind Bhai Jani was 3 years old when his mother wrapped him in a sari, jumped off the SS Tilawa for dear life, not knowing how to swim, into the last lifeboat, sitting now in the lifeboat for the next 2 days. The only thing he remembers is eating a biscuit. And the story goes that the family in Gujarat had heard what happened, but they thought that they died. And so being Hindus, they were going through the rituals of the 12 or 13 days of grieving. And by the time they're wrapping up these rituals for Arvind Bhai and his mother, they turn up and they're like, oh my goodness, you're still alive. So that was their story. Tej Prakash Kaur, very sad. They're a Sikh family from Punjab, I believe. And what had happened in their case was when the first husband and wife with 3 boys and 1 girl. The girl, of course, is Tej Prakash Mangat. She's the 90-year-old from Cincinnati, Ohio. And what had happened was when the first torpedo attacked, the husband had to put his wife in one lifeboat, put his daughter in the second lifeboat. We're not too clear what happened with the boys in that moment, but our understanding is that when the second torpedo hit Tilawa, that lifeboat was destroyed. Sadly, the wife died, the 3 boys died, and the husband had no idea where they were, where the daughter was. He ended up floating on a raft for 2 days. He found a 6-year-old girl. He was, holding her, and we were told by email that they wanted to feed. They were hungry. They had no idea how long they were going to be out at sea, and they saw a couple of onions floating, and he would peel one layer of the onion at a time to feed this little girl. And how happy he was to at least find his 9-year-old daughter when HMS Birmingham and SS Carthage made the rescue operation. There's other details. For example, we spoke to Mr. Palmer of the UK, who said that when his father was alive, there was an elderly lady who had given him a gold bangle and said, please, I'm not going to make it. Promise me that when you get back to India, you'll take this to my village and take it back to my family. We met Mr. Mervyn Maciel, who is approaching 94 years of age, and he lives in South London, also near the home where I grew up. He's from Goa, and he tells us that he was in a Jesuit school near Bombay. He said goodbye to his parents and his 3 younger siblings. They go on SS Tilawa. Long story short, he's stuck on the ship, and both parents lose their lives with these 3 young babies, toddlers. And when the rescue, when HMS Birmingham arrives to Bombay, there's quite a bit of commotion, and his cousins, Mervyn's cousins, actually get to Bombay, go literally from hospital to hospital, trying to see if their loved ones survived, and if they can speak to any of the survivors. And they actually met a cabin boy who had served Mervyn's father, and the cabin boy goes on to say that he was calling Mervyn's father to jump. And Mervyn's father said, how can I? I've got these 2 babies with me. And he perished with the ship. So, and the family that went from hospital to hospital, then they live here in Toronto. Mervyn's cousin is 96 years of age, and I was able to find him in North York and go and visit him with my son, Lucas. So, going back to your point of preserving our heritage, telling these family stories, the previous generation, my grandfather's generation, they weren't really good at being so open and transparent. It was a very traumatic story. And, think about even some of the opposition that we faced from our extended family, who didn't want to talk about the story, didn't want to tell us who our real great grandfather was. We're very grateful that our 9-year-old grandfather, who lost his father overnight, his uncle ends up raising him and giving him a wonderful life, and tries to pass on a fatherly love and give him a new start in East Africa and eventually in Leicester, England. Probably just before Idi Amin kicked out the Gujaratis. We are a Gujarati family, by the way. So, we're very, very grateful for what he did for us. But, we also wanted to preserve the memory of this young man who had an identity. He was a real person. He had a wife, he had a life, he had a son.
What was
He
his
had
name?
lots of things. His name was Mr. Nichabai Chibabai Solanki. And, the story goes that in 2007, when I was 20 years old and my father was age 44, he was sitting with my grandfather one day and saw this black and white random picture in the cabinet. And my father asks my grandfather, "Who's that, man? I haven't seen that picture before."
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather says, "That's my dad." And my father has a bit of a mental earthquake and says, "Sorry, hold on. Vallabhbhai is my granddad, is your dad. What is going on here?" And that's how the story started. Now, at that time, there was an understanding that there were precious metals on the ship, and we had taken the story and the research as far as we could. There was actually 3 gentlemen in South Africa who had started the SS Tilawa Foundation, and what's awesome about their efforts is, one, they were able to meet someone who was part of the HMS Birmingham operation, and actually were able to get a couple of photographs. So one photograph of some of the survivors in a lifeboat that you can see on our website, tilawa1942.com, and then a second photograph of some of the survivors on HMS Birmingham. So that was awesome. But they also got a copy of the Transvaal Congress passenger manifest. And, Ben, imagine what we felt at the moment we saw Nichabai Chibabai Solanki, as well as his first cousin, Devji Bugga, one as a survivor and one as missing. It was just so mind-blowing. But, after that, what could we do? It was then in 2020 that there was some news that the ship had been found. It was incredible. There was a gentleman who actually found the ship and was able to salvage some of the silver. And so now, since then, there is hope that we will be able to get further access to photographs and videos, and perhaps even learn more of the incident from seeing the wreck itself.
Emile, it's great to talk to you. It's great to hear more of that story. It was lovely to talk to your dad actually before Christmas, and the fact that you're still finding survivors and descendants of those survivors just seems to me it's incredible. Look, I've been all over your website, which is absolutely great. I know that you do a lot of work on that, Tilawa1942.com. It's well worth people going to have a look at. Can we stay in touch if there are any more developments? The more we can tell of this story, it seems to me a good thing. So can we talk in a month or two and see how things are going?
Yeah, it'll be wonderful. One final nugget for your listeners. Those in Britain will be happy to hear that the British Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Alan Gamel, OBE, was actually chief guest at the commemoration in Mumbai. Secondly, we just received a letter from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's office, for the first time, the UK government acknowledging the forgotten tragedy and wanting to show some support as well. And our next goal for 2023 is to see if the Greenwich Maritime Museum or other museums in England can actually, for the first time, feature the SS Tilawa tragedy.
Emile, keep in touch, and you're welcome on the show anytime, and I'm very grateful. It's early in the morning in Toronto, so we're very grateful for you. But keep in touch, and I can't emphasise enough, people want to find out more about this. Tilawa 1942 is where you'll find it online. Emile Solanki, thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you very much, and again, greetings to your listeners.